This is my 2009 Nissan Xterra. It is a bit of a shit box, but it is my shit box and I love it. But there is one thing that I do not like about this Xterra. The seats on these vehicles, along with Nissan Frontiers of the same era, are horrible. They lack adjustability and tend to tear apart at this point, especially on the driver's side. I was finally able to upgrade these seats recently and I will explain how I did it. Since this generation of Xterras share a platform with Nissan Frontiers and Nissan Pathfinders of the same era, seats can be easily swapped between them, granted you can figure out how to wire them. Mechanically, they are a drop-in replacement for each other. I have been looking for the power adjustable heated seats from higher trim Pathfinders, and while I could find them on marketplaces, they were always expensive. Recently, I came across a pair of seats in decent condition from a 2011 Pathfinder Silver Edition and immediately drove 90 miles each way to purchase the pair. When I got them home, they were very dirty, and I mean very dirty. So I set out to clean them thoroughly. I used this leather cleaner product and leather brush. I thoroughly sprayed down the seats. Once the product had some time to penetrate the leather, I agitated the product with the brush. And finally, I wiped down the seats with microfiber cloths. I had to do a second round of spraying, agitating, and wiping. I had to repeat the process couple more times before the fiber cloths started to come clean even after wipes. I then did the same process for the sides and back. Now that the seats started looking good, I wanted to make sure that the electronics on the seats worked as expected. This is the main harness for power and heat control. After looking at the circuit diagrams posted by someone who did a similar swap on a Frontier, I was able to identify the light blue as the positive power for seat adjustment and the adjacent black as the wire for ground. With this information, I connected these wires to a Ryobi 12-volt battery. A word of caution here, while it may be okay to test like this, when installing these kind of devices in your car, the connection should be made through fuses or circuit breakers. With those connections in place, I could verify that the seat adjustments work. Both the seat and the backrest moved as expected. Now it was time to verify that the heated seat circuit works. These are the three wires used for powering the heating element. The white powers the high heat, the grey powers low heat, and the black is to be grounded. Here I have connected the low heat and ground to the battery positive and negative respectively. After a while, the seat started heating up. After that, I repeated the test with high heat. After looking at the service manual for the Pathfinder, it became clear that the power adjustment mechanisms for both seats run through a 50 amp circuit breaker. Since I could not find any 50 amp fuses or connectors to tap to in my Xterra, I decided to run power for this from the main battery through a 50 amp fuse. For the heating element, the circuit shows it being connected through a 10 amp fuse. Luckily, the Xterra has a fuse for this in the glove box fuse holder. It is at position 16. With this information, I drew out a circuit diagram for the connections I need to make. A wire need to be run from the battery through a 50 amp fuse and then through the firewall into the cabin. Then the wire gets split into the left and right seats and to the respective pins for both seats. For heating, we use a add a fuse circuit to fuse 16 and split it to passenger and driver heated seat switches. And then from each switch, the high and low wires are run to the respective pins for each of the seats. I connected this 50 amp fuse holder to 10 gauge wire and through the wire loom and ran it to the left side of the firewall where there is a grommet that can be poked off and drilled to pass the wire through. And now inside the cabin, under the steering column, the wire can be pulled through. I then secured it with cable ties and ran it to the center console where I split it for driver and passenger seats. Similarly, I ran a 14 gauge wire from the fuse to the center console for heating. Ideally, you would use this panel on the dash for wiring up the heater switches as shown in late model Nissan Frontiers. However, in my Xterra, this panel has only a single button and a rather useless cubby. It is possible to buy the plastic panel trim for 5 switches, although it is somewhat pricey in my opinion. I'll also have to buy these switches. For now, I decided to buy these cheap Amazon switches and decided to install it on my central console. I had already popped the panel for the console and this is where I plan to install the switches. I cut a piece of plywood on my table saw and sanded it with an orbital sander into the shape of the opening. Once I had confirmed the rough fit, I took a piece of ABS plastic and stuck it to the plywood with super glue. I then trimmed and sanded the edges of the ABS. I then drilled the holes for the switches and fit them in. This is what the end result looked like, good enough for me. Removing the Xterra seats is pretty easy. Each seat is held in place with 4 bolts. Once the seat is out of the way, you can see the main harness present in the Xterra. The yellow is for airbag, the highlighted 2-pin connector is for the seatbelt sensor, and the other white is for passenger occupancy sensor. This is where I ran into the first of 2 issues. It turns out that Xterra and Pathfinders uses slightly different connectors for the seatbelt. You can see it here in the part numbers. One is 218766085 and the other one is 218767070. In the end, I decided to simply swap the seatbelt connector assembly from my Xterra seat to the Pathfinder seat. With that, I was able to get the passenger seat working. Here you can see the power seat in action. I moved on to the driver's seat, repeated the seatbelt connector swap, and then ran into my second issue. On the driver's side, the harness connectors on the Pathfinder seats are mounted on a metal sheet. My Xterra came with the premium sound system and has an amplifier under the driver's seat. And this metal tab fouls the amplifier. In the end, I solved it by removing the metal sheet with pliers and mounting the harness connected to the seat bottom, made the connections, and got the seat working. This is the final result. It was a relatively easy mode and I am very happy with the results. Thank you for watching.